Marilyn, I desperately want to know what existence is. And you know, I did my Ph.D. in brain science, I talked to physicists, philosophers, and even though I'm a little skeptical about ESP, I cannot avoid it. Why do we find ESP so intriguing?
Well, I think throughout history and every recorded culture, we have people who believe in these kinds of experiences, report these kinds of experiences. So just at a strictly anecdotal level, we see that time and time again, people have the kinds of experiences that seem to preclude a kind of conventional scientific answer. It suggests that somehow our consciousness can reach out and travel in the world in ways that, you know, a strictly materialist brain science kind of view wouldn't allow for.
What are some of the examples of the anecdotal evidence that has been reported frequently throughout history, different cultures, in this broad way across humanity?
Well, people report a variety of different kinds of experiences in a variety of different kinds of states of consciousness. One of the most common ways that people report these is in sleep or dream experiences, where they are now in a non-ordinary state of awareness, where a lot of the conventional sensory inputs have been eliminated, and somehow it allows the brain and the mind to access information about the physical world that we're just too busy in a normal day to attend to. So from an anecdotal or just kind of spontaneous perspective, it appears that, you know, at the base level, many people report the experience. Then the deeper question is, you know, from an ontological point of view, is there some reality to this? Is it really true that somehow I'm able to extend the reach of my perception, you know, even onto the other side of the planet to describe activities that are happening there? And rather than just taking it on face value, scientists have now begun to really look at the possibility that we can demonstrate under randomized double-blind type protocols that in fact there is some kind of communication that happens between two people.
And this communication can be, as you say, between two people, it can be between a person and events that are non-living, so you have some perception, some cognition of something that's happening that you shouldn't have any access to, or even over time into the future, which seems to defy most of what we would commonly call, you know, our physical understanding.
I think when people talk about psi phenomena, they're talking about kind of four classes of experience. One is telepathy, which is a kind of mind-to-mind communication, so I can somehow know your thoughts or feelings.
Not too many of them, I
Well, that is one of the issues that comes up, is privacy. The second area is clairvoyance, the idea that somebody can acquire information about an object or event that they don't have any sensory information about. The third would be precognition, and the notion that somehow we are able to reach ahead in time, gain information about the future, and bring it back and report on it. And then the fourth class of phenomena are these kinds of mind over matter experiences that people report.
Psychokinesis.
Psychokinesis. Mm-hmm. And certainly when we talk about, you know, healing and intentional healing, people often report and again, from a cross-cultural point of view, this is very widespread, that they believe there are practitioners who can harness their intention to bring about physiological changes in another person, even when the person doesn't know that they're being intended for. So all of this, you know, is what we call psi phenomena. And these are sort of, you know, a class of interrelated experiences. And I think ultimately it was decided that it wasn't as sort of beneficial to try and separate each of them. You know, is it clairvoyance? Is it telepathy? Yeah. Rather, can we establish that there are these kind of extended capacities that can be documented and ultimately incorporated into our worldview?
Is it the two classes? Is it the anecdotal and the scientific? And does the anecdotal have religious connotations? Does it have... What can we say about the anecdotal throughout history?
Well, certainly it seems to be associated with certain people, although there's a pretty widespread distribution of the kinds of people that report these experiences. In terms of my own field work as an anthropologist, I've gone down into the Amazon, for example, and worked with the Achuar Indians in Ecuador. And this is a very interesting group of people, just like a lot of the Amerindian cultures, where they believe that the quality of their inner experience is actually more reliable powerful than the information they get from the physical external world. And they have a practice of dream sharing. So it's their belief that at night, when we sleep, the soul somehow travels from the body, goes out into the spirit realm, and gains information. So just in the same way that we might get up in the morning and read the newspaper to find out what happened in the world while we were sleeping, these folks believe that they have to come back and actually share the content of their dream experience such that the head of the household or whoever the elder is begins to interpret it. And the idea here is that each person gets a piece of the story, and that it's by putting the pieces together that you can begin to understand what's going to happen in the future.
Now,
so it's precognition.
Why shouldn't we attribute all of that to just a pre-industrial, archaic way of thinking about the world with no basis in reality at all, and people who ultimately, with respect for their culture, should be helped into modern thinking?
Well, I think that is a great question. I think that there's a prejudice in the minds of the kind of modernist culture that we live in, that this is just some kind of wishful thinking or superstition on the part of these, non-literate cultures. When you begin to look at the survey data within our own society, you see that it's very widespread. The majority of people in America, for example, believe in some kind of psychic ability, and furthermore, it correlates with higher levels of education. So another criticism of this would be that it's, again, these kind of non-literate, non-educated people that are holding these superstitions. But what you find actually is that there's a correlation between higher levels of education and belief in the possibility of these kinds of experiences.
And one can argue, I've thought about myself because I'm very interested in this, it's because I have an intellectual interest in a lot of things, and therefore I'm interested in this, but that may be a bias in the wrong direction. In other words, I question that in myself, that I wonder if my interest is artificial, and I'm trying to wishful thinking myself into the existence of something that really doesn't exist.
I think there's a couple things to say about that. I think open-minded skepticism is an incredibly healthy attitude. And I think that there is a tremendous amount of nonsense that isn't true. And so to be able to develop some kind of discrimination about what is true and what isn't. I also think it's true that we have this capacity sometimes to assume that we have all the answers, and that the materialist model of reality is kind of set and complete. And yet what we find when you see these kinds of experiences reported time and again by people you wouldn't expect, that you have to begin to think that perhaps the ontology or the model of reality we hold isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. And how do you begin to sort of stretch that in such a way?
This is the most fundamental thing that we could do if it were indeed the case true. And so one needs to subject the anecdotal evidence to very rigorous kinds of thinking, because everyone has an experience that seems like it's impossible. But if we think about all the experiences that we haven't had, because we didn't recognize it as such, but all the possibilities that didn't occur, sometimes the possibilities that occur would just be a normal statistical variation that we didn't know all the unsuccessful trials in our own lives.
That's right. So that's why I think a scientific point of view is really important, and I do want to talk about that, but just to take a step back and say that, we tend to, again in our culture, privilege the objective. And so the subjective is unreliable and mushy and soft, and we don't want to really attend to that. And yet we see that many people who report sort of life-changing experiences. I've just completed a 10-year project looking at transformation. And you see that, oftentimes people change their worldview based on pain and suffering. But oftentimes they base this kind of transformation on a psychic experience or some kind of opening. So whether it's true in an ontological sense, of a definitive model of reality, or whether it's simply something that allows them to expand their model of what is possible, in either case, it becomes an opportunity for them to see the world in a different way.
I totally agree with that. And I think you've now encompassed the two explanations for a lot of what has happened, but there's a huge difference between the two.
That's
One
right.
is almost a self-infliction of an artificiality, which may have a positive effect. So that's fine if it helps a person, fine. But it's a little bit of a self-delusion that helps one in a situation. And I won't touch that. I don't like that. I would rather be unhappy and not fool myself into thinking something exists that doesn't exist.
Right.
But somebody else might have a different view, I'm fine. But it's the ontology, the real existence of something that really concerns me.
When you think about the multiple ways of knowing, so how do we determine what is the appropriate ontology, or is there even one ontology that is the definitive view of reality? But I think one of the ways of knowing that is so powerful in our culture is the scientific method, and the notion of, an objective, randomized, way of understanding. And so science really has a lot to tell us about another way of understanding reality, and particularly this idea of psychic phenomena.
Well, I think that's very important that we address the question, are there multiple ways of knowing? Very legitimate, not clear there's more than one answer. The logical one would be with the scientific method. But if there is another way, a first-person subjective one, that indeed is important.
I think so. And I also think that there's a tension, sort of a kind of dialectic between what we know objectively and what we understand subjectively. And in my thinking, the great breakthroughs are going to come when you look at that interface between the inner and the outer.